My parents canceled my 18th birthday because of my sister's tantrum, so I moved out quietly and watched their perfect family crash without me. My name is Jessica, and this is the story of how I went from being the reliable daughter to the architect of my parents' downfall. Growing up as the oldest of 3 kids in suburban Denver, I was always the responsible one. While my younger siblings Madison, 17, and Tyler, 15, acted out, I maintained perfect grades, worked part-time at the local bookstore, and helped manage household responsibilities. My parents, Robert and Linda, relied on me heavily, often treating me more like a third parent than their daughter. Madison was the golden child despite her constant drama. Beautiful, popular, and manipulative, she had our parents wrapped around her finger. Tyler was the baby who could do no wrong, even when he was struggling in classes and getting suspended for fighting. And then there was me, the dependable one who never caused problems, which apparently meant I deserved the least attention. For months, I had been planning my 18th birthday party. It wasn't going to be anything extravagant, just a small gathering with my closest friends at our house. I had saved money from my job to pay for decorations, food, and a small DJ setup. My parents had agreed to let me use the living room and backyard, and I was so excited to finally have something that was just mine. 2 days before my birthday, Madison came home crying about how her boyfriend Jake had broken up with her. She threw herself dramatically onto the couch, wailing about how her life was ruined and she couldn't possibly go to school the next day. My mother immediately went into crisis mode, hovering over Madison like she was terminally ill rather than dealing with typical teenage heartbreak. Jessica, my mother called to me as I was reviewing the party playlist in my room. We need to talk. I walked downstairs to find both my parents looking uncomfortable, while Madison continued her theatrical sobbing in the background. Honey, my father began, avoiding eye contact, we're going to need to cancel your party this weekend. I felt my stomach drop. What? Why? Madison is going through a really difficult time right now, my mother explained, stroking Madison's hair. She needs our full attention and support. Having a loud party with all your friends would be too overwhelming for her. Are you serious? I stared at them in disbelief. I've been planning this for months. I paid for everything myself. All my friends are expecting to come. Madison looked up from her fake crying session with the most smug expression I had ever seen. I'm sorry, Jess, but I'm just so heartbroken. I don't think I can handle being around all those people and noise. Then go to your room, I said flatly. Or better yet, go stay at Grandma's for the weekend. Jessica. My mother snapped. Your sister needs us right now. You're 18 now, which means you're an adult. Adults make sacrifices for their family. I've been making sacrifices for this family my entire life, I shouted, finally letting years of frustration bubble over. When has anyone ever made a sacrifice for me? Don't be so selfish, my father said sternly. Madison is hurting. Madison is always hurting about something. Last month it was because she didn't make varsity cheerleading, even though she never practiced. The month before that, it was because her friends went to a party without her. There's always some crisis with Madison that somehow becomes everyone else's problem. That's enough, my mother said coldly. The party is cancelled, and that's final. I looked at my parents, then at Madison, who was barely containing her satisfaction. Tyler was playing video games in the corner, completely oblivious to the family drama as usual. Fine, I said quietly. You want to prioritize Madison over me? You've made your choice. I went upstairs to my room and called each of my friends to cancel. They were disappointed but understanding, which somehow made it hurt worse. These were good people who cared about me, unlike my own family. That night, lying in bed, something shifted inside me. I was done being the family doormat. I was 18, legally an adult, and I had been supporting myself financially for over a year. I started researching apartments in the area and calculating my budget. My birthday came and went without acknowledgement from my family. My parents took Madison shopping for new clothes to cheer her up, while I worked my shift at the bookstore and came home to an empty house. No cake, no presents, no happy birthday. It was like the day didn't exist. Over the next few weeks, I quietly began executing my plan. I found a small studio apartment about 20 minutes away that I could afford with my bookstore income and some freelance tutoring I had started doing. I began moving my belongings out gradually, taking only a few items at a time so no one would notice. The beautiful irony was that my family was so used to me handling everything that they didn't pay attention to what I was actually doing. I had always been the one to remind my mother about Tyler's school events, help Madison with her homework when she was failing, and assist my father with household repairs. I did grocery shopping, laundry, and cooking dinner at least 3 nights a week. I was essentially a live-in nanny and housekeeper, and they had no idea how much they relied on me. I found a second job at a local tutoring center and picked up more hours at the bookstore. I was working about 50 hours a week between both jobs, but I was determined to be completely financially independent. I also started taking online college courses, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for because I was too busy managing my family's chaos. 6 weeks after my canceled birthday, I moved out completely. I left a simple note on my bed: "I've moved out. Don't contact me unless it's an emergency. Jessica." I blocked their phone numbers and social media accounts. I didn't want to hear their guilt trips or demands that I come back to fix whatever was falling apart. The first sign that things were going wrong for them came 3 days later when Madison called the bookstore, crying hysterically because my mother had forgotten to pick her up from cheerleading practice. Apparently, no one had been keeping track of her schedule since I left. "Please come home, Jess," she sobbed into the phone. "Mom forgot about me, and I waited for 2 hours. Call an Uber," I said calmly and hung up. What Madison didn't know was that I had been the one maintaining the family calendar for the past 3 years. I had a complex system of color-coded schedules, reminder notes, and backup plans that kept everyone's activities coordinated. My parents had never bothered to learn how I organized everything because they assumed I would always be there to handle it. The second call came from Tyler 2 days later. He was at school, panicking because he had forgotten his science project at home and needed someone to bring it to him before his presentation. In the past, I would have driven to school during my lunch break to save him from failing. "Can't you just ask Mom or Dad?" he whined when I told him I couldn't help. "They're at work, Tyler. You'll have to face the consequences of your own forgetfulness." "But you always help me," he protested. "That was my mistake," I replied before hanging up. Within the first week of my departure, I received 17 phone calls and 32 text messages from various family members asking me to solve their problems. Madison needed help with her algebra homework. Tyler couldn't find his soccer cleats. My mother couldn't remember the password for the family streaming account. My father didn't know where we kept the spare house keys. Each time, I either ignored the communication or gave them a brief, unhelpful response. After years of being their go-to problem solver, watching them flounder without me was both satisfying and eye-opening. I hadn't realized just how dependent they had become on my constant assistance. My new routine was blissfully simple. I woke up in my quiet apartment, made coffee without having to clean up anyone else's mess from the night before, and got ready for work without competing for bathroom time. The silence was golden after years of constant family drama and noise. At the bookstore, I threw myself into work with new enthusiasm. Without the mental exhaustion of managing my family's chaos, I had energy to be more creative and productive. I reorganized the young adult fiction section, created themed displays that increased sales, and started a book club that met monthly in the store. My manager, Sarah, noticed my improved performance immediately. "Jessica, you seem different lately," she commented during one of our weekly check-ins. "More focused, more confident. Whatever you're doing in your personal life is working." "I moved out of my parents' house," I explained. "It's amazing how much mental energy I have when I'm not constantly putting out other people's fires." Sarah nodded knowingly. "I went through something similar when I was your age. Sometimes the people closest to us drain us the most because they assume we'll always be available to fix their problems." This conversation opened my eyes to something I hadn't fully realized. My family hadn't just been taking advantage of my help, they had been stunting my growth as an individual. I had never learned to pursue my own interests because I was always too busy managing their crises. With my newfound freedom, I started exploring hobbies I had always wanted to try. I joined a photography club that met on weekends, signed up for a creative writing class at the community college, and even tried rock climbing at the local gym. For the first time in years, I was living for myself rather than existing as an extension of my family's needs. The rock climbing gym is where I met Marcus. He was patient and encouraging as he taught me the basics, and unlike the guys I had dated in high school, he seemed genuinely interested in me as a person rather than what I could do for him. "You're really independent," he observed after we had been dating for a few weeks. "Most people our age are still pretty dependent on their families for everything." I learned independence the hard way, I told him, and gradually opened up about my family's situation. Marcus was the first person who validated my feelings about what I had experienced. "That's not normal, Jessica. Parents are supposed to support all their children equally, not turn one kid into a live-in servant while spoiling the others." Hearing someone else confirm what I had suspected made me realize that my family's treatment of me wasn't just unfair, it was emotionally abusive. I had been gaslit into believing that constantly sacrificing for others was simply what good daughters did. Meanwhile, the reports from home kept getting worse. My friend Emma, who was still in touch with Madison through social media, would occasionally update me on the family drama. "Your sister posted about failing her chemistry test because no one helped her study," Emma told me during one of our coffee dates. "The comments are brutal. People are asking where you are, and Madison keeps making passive-aggressive posts about how some people abandon their families when things get tough." "She's rewriting history," I said, stirring my latte. I helped her study for 3 years, and she never appreciated it. Now that I'm gone, suddenly I'm the villain for not being available to bail her out. Emma scrolled through more posts on her phone. Oh wow, she's really going off about how her sister disappeared and left her to deal with everything alone. She's getting a lot of sympathy from people who don't know the full story. This bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Madison was painting herself as the victim while completely ignoring the years of service I had provided to the family. But I resisted the urge to defend myself on social media. Engaging would only drag me back into their dysfunction. Instead, I focused on building my new life. I had started taking evening classes toward my psychology degree, fascinated by family dynamics and codependency after experiencing it firsthand. My professors were impressed with my insights into dysfunctional family systems, though they didn't know I was speaking from personal experience. One evening, as I was studying for my developmental psychology exam, my phone rang. It was my grandmother, my father's mother, who I had always been close to. "Jessica, honey," she said gently, "I've been hearing some concerning things about your family situation." "What has Dad told you?" I asked, immediately defensive. "He says you moved out without warning and won't speak to anyone. Your mother is telling people you've become selfish and ungrateful. But I know you, sweetheart, and none of that sounds like the girl I raised to be thoughtful and responsible." My grandmother was the one person in my family who had always seen me clearly, so I told her the whole story. About the canceled birthday party, about years of being taken for granted, about Madison's manipulation and Tyler's entitlement. I told her about my parents' favoritism and how I had essentially been functioning as a third parent since I was 14. "Oh, honey," she said sadly when I finished. "I had no idea it was that bad. I knew Madison could be dramatic and Tyler was spoiled, but I didn't realize they had turned you into the family caretaker. I just couldn't do it anymore, Grandma. I felt like I was disappearing, like I only existed to solve other people's problems." "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. But I want you to know that your parents are really struggling without you. The house is a disaster, Madison is failing most of her classes, and Tyler got arrested last week for spray painting the school." "Arrested?" This was news to me. Vandalism charges. He spray painted curse words on the gymnasium wall because he was angry about being benched from the basketball team. "Your father had to hire a lawyer, and they're making him pay restitution and do community service." I felt a brief pang of concern, but then reminded myself that Tyler's choices weren't my responsibility. "I'm sorry to hear that, but it's not my problem to fix." "Of course not," my grandmother agreed. "I just thought you should know. Your parents are talking about marriage counseling because they're blaming each other for how everything fell apart." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment processing this information. Part of me felt vindicated that my absence was having such a dramatic impact, but another part felt sad that my family was falling apart. I had to remind myself that they had created this situation through years of poor choices and favoritism. The marriage counseling detail was particularly interesting. In all my years of watching my parents enable Madison and neglect me, I had never seen them question their parenting methods. Apparently, it took losing their built-in problem solver for them to realize something was wrong. A few weeks later, I was working the evening shift at the bookstore when a familiar figure walked through the door. It was Mrs. Patterson, my high school guidance counselor, who had always been supportive of my college plans. "Jessica," she said warmly. "I heard you moved out on your own. How are you adjusting to independence?" "Better than I expected," I replied honestly. "It's peaceful." Mrs. Patterson browsed the psychology section while we chatted, and when she brought her books to the counter, she said quietly, "Your mother came to see me last week. She's worried about you and wanted to know if I could reach out." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that you're an adult and if she wants to communicate with you, she needs to do it directly instead of going through intermediaries." Mrs. Patterson paused. "But I will say, she seemed genuinely distressed. She kept saying she didn't realize how much you were doing for the family until you left." "Ignorance isn't an excuse when it goes on for years," I said, probably more harshly than necessary. Mrs. Patterson nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. Sometimes parents get so caught up in managing the problem children that they neglect the ones who don't cause trouble. It's not fair, but it's unfortunately common." "Did she say anything else?" "She asked if I thought you'd ever come back. I told her that would depend entirely on whether the family was willing to acknowledge their mistakes and make real changes." Mrs. Patterson smiled sadly. "Between you and me, I don't think she understood what I meant by real changes." This conversation stayed with me for days. I realized that my mother was probably expecting me to eventually get tired of being on my own and return to my old role as the family fixer. She didn't understand that I hadn't just moved out physically, I had fundamentally changed my relationship with all of them. My new life was proving that I was capable of so much more than I had ever imagined. At the tutoring center, I had become their most requested tutor for college-bound seniors. My success rate for improving students' grades was impressive, and I was earning enough from tutoring to cover most of my living expenses. But more importantly, I was helping other young people who reminded me of myself, overachievers who were burning out from trying to meet everyone else's expectations. I found myself giving them advice that I wish someone had given me years earlier. It's okay to say no, I told Sarah, a 17-year-old who was struggling to balance honors classes, 3 extracurricular activities, and helping her single mother with her younger siblings. You can't pour from an empty cup. But everyone is counting on me, Sarah protested. If I don't help my mom, she'll be overwhelmed. If I quit any of my activities, I won't get into a good college. And what happens to you in all of this? I asked. When do you get to be a teenager instead of a mini adult? The question clearly struck a nerve because Sarah started crying. I don't remember the last time I did something just because I wanted to. Helping students like Sarah reinforced my decision to leave my family. I could see clearly in others what I had been unable to see in myself, that being reliable and helpful was admirable, but not when it came at the expense of your own well-being and development. Around this time, I started getting increasingly desperate messages from home. Madison had been caught cheating on a major exam and was facing suspension. Tyler had been kicked off the basketball team for his attitude problems and was taking his anger out on the family. My parents were fighting constantly and had started sleeping in separate bedrooms. The messages came from different family members but had the same theme: everything would be better if I just came home and helped sort things out. My father sent a long email detailing all the problems they were facing and ending with, "We've learned our lesson about taking you for granted. If you come back, we'll make sure your contributions are appreciated." My mother loved voicemails saying things like, "I know we made mistakes, but we're family. Families stick together through difficult times." Even Tyler, who had barely acknowledged my existence when I lived at home, sent me a text saying, "Please come back, Jess. Everything sucks without you here." But it was Madison's approach that revealed the most about the family dynamic. Instead of apologizing or taking responsibility, she sent me angry messages blaming me for abandoning the family during their time of need. "You're being incredibly selfish," one of her texts read. "Mom is having panic attacks, Dad's blood pressure is through the roof, Tyler is acting out because he misses you, and I'm failing school because I don't have help with my homework. This is all your fault for leaving." The audacity of that message was breathtaking. Even in crisis, Madison couldn't acknowledge that her own choices had consequences. She was still expecting me to sacrifice my well-being to clean up messes that she and Tyler had created. I showed the message to Marcus, who read it with increasing disbelief. "She's literally blaming you for the consequences of their own actions," he said. "Does she not understand that she's responsible for her own grades? Madison has never been held accountable for anything," I explained. In her mind, other people exist to solve her problems. She genuinely believes that me refusing to help her is the same as me causing her to fail. "That's not how healthy families work," Marcus said. "My parents would never expect my sister to sacrifice her own goals to bail me out of trouble I created myself." Hearing Marcus talk about his family's dynamics was educational. His parents treated their children as individuals with separate needs and goals, not as interchangeable resources to be deployed wherever problems arose. When his younger brother had struggled with math, they hired a tutor instead of expecting Marcus to sacrifice his own study time. When Marcus had wanted to quit piano lessons to focus on soccer, his parents supported his decision instead of guilting him about disappointing his siblings. This was what normal looked like, and it highlighted just how dysfunctional my family had been. As winter turned to spring, the reports from home became increasingly dramatic. Madison had been suspended for 3 days after the cheating incident and was now in danger of not graduating. Tyler had been arrested again, this time for shoplifting, and was facing juvenile court. My parents' marriage was hanging by a thread, with my mother threatening divorce if my father didn't fix the children he had supposedly spoiled. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my parents had ignored my warnings about Madison's manipulation and Tyler's entitlement. They had dismissed my concerns as jealousy or sibling rivalry. Now they were facing the natural consequences of their permissive parenting, and they wanted me to come back and fix what they had broken. But I was done being their emergency relief valve. I had spent 18 years managing their dysfunction, and I wasn't going back to that role. Instead, I was thriving in ways I had never imagined possible. My grades in my college courses were perfect, I had been promoted again at the bookstore, and my tutoring business was booming. I had also started volunteering at a local teen crisis center, helping other young people who were struggling with family dysfunction. The volunteer work was deeply fulfilling because I could use my experience to help others without sacrificing my own well-being. Many of the teens I worked with came from families where they had been parentified, forced to take on adult responsibilities while their actual parents remained immature and irresponsible. How did you break free from it? asked Alex, a 16-year-old who was essentially raising his 3 younger siblings while his mother partied and his father worked excessive hours to avoid being home. I had to accept that I couldn't save them from themselves, I explained. I was so afraid of what would happen if I stopped managing everyone's problems that I never gave them the chance to learn how to manage their own problems. But what if something really bad happens? Alex worried. What if my siblings get hurt or my parents' marriage falls apart? Those are risks that exist whether you sacrifice yourself or not, I pointed out. The difference is that if you sacrifice yourself, you guarantee that at least one person, you, will be hurt. If you step back and let them face consequences, there's a chance they might actually learn and grow. Working with teens like Alex reinforced my decision daily. I could see clearly that my family's dysfunction wasn't unique, and that leaving had been not only justified but necessary for my own development. By late spring, the situation at home had reached what seemed like rock bottom. Madison was attending summer school to make up for failed classes, Tyler was in juvenile detention for violating the terms of his probation, and my parents had separated. My father was living in a studio apartment near his office, while my mother was trying to manage the household alone. The house that had once been my pride and joy, I had spent hours keeping it clean and organized, was reportedly in shambles. Neighbors were complaining about the overgrown yard and the noise from Madison's parties. The family that had once looked perfect from the outside was now the neighborhood's cautionary tale. Over the following weeks, I heard through mutual friends and social media what was happening at home. Without me there to manage everything, the household was descending into chaos. Tyler had been suspended from school for 3 days because no one had signed his permission slip for a field trip, and when he acted out in class instead, he got in trouble. My parents had to take time off work to deal with the school administration. Madison was failing 2 classes because she never did homework without me there to help her. My mother had to hire a tutor, which was expensive and cut into their vacation fund. My father couldn't figure out how to use the washing machine properly and had turned several loads of laundry pink by mixing colors wrong. He had to buy new work clothes to replace the ones he had ruined. The house was constantly a mess because I had been doing most of the cleaning. My mother, who worked full-time and had never had to manage the household alone, was overwhelmed trying to keep up with everything. But the real problems started about 2 months after I left. Madison, no longer having me as a buffer between her and consequences, started getting into serious trouble. Without me there to help her with homework and keep her on track, her grades plummeted. She was put on academic probation and told she couldn't participate in any extracurricular activities, including cheerleading, which was her entire social identity. Desperate to maintain her social status, Madison started skipping classes and lying about where she was. She got caught sneaking out to parties and was brought home by the police after a house party was busted for underage drinking. My parents, who had never had to deal with serious behavioral issues before because I had always been the problem-free child, had no idea how to handle her. Tyler, meanwhile, was acting out more than ever, probably because he was getting even less attention than usual now that Madison was in constant crisis mode and my parents were struggling to manage basic household functions. He got into a fight at school that resulted in the other kid needing stitches. The family had to pay for medical bills and was threatened with a lawsuit. My mother started calling the bookstore regularly, begging me to come home. I had my manager tell her I wasn't available. Eventually, she showed up at the store during my shift. "Jessica, please," she said, looking exhausted. "We need you to come home. Everything is falling apart without you." "I'm working," I said, not looking up from the book I was shelving. "You need to leave, or I'll call security. Your sister needs help with her grades, Tyler is getting suspended every other week, and your father and I can't keep up with everything. We're a family. We need to stick together." I finally looked at her. Where was this family loyalty on my 18th birthday? Where was it when I spent 4 years helping everyone with everything while getting nothing in return? "We made a mistake," she admitted. "We should have found another way to handle Madison's situation." "No," I said firmly. "You made a choice. You chose Madison over me, like you always do. Now you get to live with that choice. We'll make it up to you," she pleaded. "We'll throw you a belated birthday party." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't want your pity party, Mom. I wanted my family to care about me when it mattered. That ship has sailed." She left crying, but I felt nothing but relief. Things continued to deteriorate at home. Madison's behavior escalated to the point where she was caught shoplifting at the mall. My parents had to hire a lawyer and pay hefty fines. The stress was taking a toll on their marriage, and I heard from neighbors that they were fighting constantly. Tyler's grades were so bad that he was going to be held back a year unless he attended summer school, which was expensive and meant my parents couldn't take their planned family vacation to Hawaii. My father had to take a second job to cover all the additional expenses from Madison's legal troubles, Tyler's summer school, and the tutoring Madison needed to graduate on time. My mother was having panic attacks from the stress of trying to manage everything alone. The final blow came 6 months after I had moved out. Madison, desperate to prove she was still popular and cool despite being on academic probation, decided to throw a party at the house while my parents were out of town for their anniversary weekend. She thought she could handle it alone, but the party got completely out of control. Neighbors called the police when the noise got too loud and there were cars parked all over the street. When officers arrived, they found over 100 drunk teenagers, extensive property damage, and evidence of drug use. Madison was arrested, several kids were hospitalized for alcohol poisoning, and my parents came home to find their house trashed and facing multiple lawsuits from angry parents. The legal bills alone cost them over $20,000. They had to take out a second mortgage on the house to cover everything. My father's blood pressure skyrocketed from the stress, and he ended up in the emergency room with what they thought was a heart attack but turned out to be severe anxiety. My mother showed up at my apartment after the party disaster, looking like she had aged 10 years and 6 months. "Please come home," she begged through my door. "We can't do this without you. We never realized how much you did for us." "I'm not your live-in help," I called back. "You made it clear that Madison was more important than me. Take care of her yourself. She's out of control," my mother cried. "We don't know what to do anymore." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you enabled her for 18 years, I replied. I heard her sobbing outside my door for 20 minutes before she finally left. During all of this chaos, I was thriving. My grades in my online courses were perfect, and I had been promoted to assistant manager at the bookstore. I was also making good money tutoring other students, and I had started a small business helping high school kids with college application essays. I had made new friends through work and school, people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could do for them. I was dating a sweet guy named Marcus who I had met at the tutoring center, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was living for myself instead of constantly managing other people's problems. My apartment was small but peaceful. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, kept it clean without having to pick up after 3 other people, and enjoyed the luxury of coming home to quiet instead of constant drama. The contrast between my life and my family's situation became even more apparent when I ran into Mrs. Henderson, our next-door neighbor, at the grocery store. "Jessica," she said, looking relieved to see me. "How are you, honey? I heard you moved out." "I'm doing great," I told her honestly. "How are things in the neighborhood?" She looked around conspiratorially, then leaned in closer. "I hate to gossip, but your family. There's been so much commotion. Police cars, screaming matches, that awful party that damaged the Johnson's fence. Your poor parents look exhausted all the time." "That's unfortunate," I said neutrally. "Your mother mentioned you're not speaking to them," Mrs. Henderson continued. "I hope you work things out. They seem to really need you." "They made their priorities clear," I replied. "I'm just respecting their choices." Mrs. Henderson nodded knowingly. "You were always the responsible one. I remember thinking how mature you were compared to your siblings. It's sad when parents don't appreciate what they have until it's gone." After running into Mrs. Henderson, I decided to drive by my old house out of curiosity. The yard was overgrown, there were multiple cars in various states of repair parked in the driveway, and I could see piles of laundry through the living room window. The house that had always been neat and welcoming when I lived there looked like it was falling apart. As I sat in my car looking at the house, I felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. I was sad that it had come to this, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that my years of unappreciated work were finally being recognized, even if it was too late. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Madison. "Jess, please come home. I'm sorry about your birthday. I didn't know they would cancel your party because of me. Everything is so messed up now. Tyler got arrested for vandalism, Mom and Dad are talking about divorce, and I might not graduate. We need you." I stared at the text for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, to explain how much they had hurt me and how their apology was too little, too late. But I realized that engaging would just pull me back into their drama. Instead, I deleted the message and drove back to my apartment, where Marcus was waiting with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a movie he had picked out for us to watch together. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing me hello. "It was good," I said, settling into his arms on my couch. "Really good." For the first time in my life, that was completely true. A year later, I heard through a mutual friend that Madison had barely graduated high school and was working at a fast food restaurant because my parents couldn't afford to send her to college after all the legal expenses. Tyler had been sent to live with my grandmother after his arrest and was attending a strict boarding school that was costing my parents a fortune. My parents were still married but barely speaking to each other, each blaming the other for how everything had fallen apart. My father's health had deteriorated from stress, and my mother had started seeing a therapist to deal with what she described as the guilt of failing as a parent. Meanwhile, I had finished my first year of college with a 4.0 GPA, been promoted to store manager at the bookstore, and expanded my tutoring business significantly. Marcus and I had moved in together into a beautiful one-bedroom apartment, and I was happier than I had ever been. On my 19th birthday, exactly 1 year after the cancelled party that had started everything, I threw myself the celebration I deserved. Marcus surprised me with a small party with all my new friends from work and school. We had cake, music, dancing, and genuine laughter. It was everything my 18th birthday party should have been, and more. As I blew out my candles, I made a wish that I would continue to have the strength to prioritize my own happiness over other people's convenience. Looking around at the faces of people who genuinely cared about me, I knew that wish was already coming true. The best revenge, I had learned, wasn't actively trying to hurt the people who had hurt me. It was simply removing myself from their chaos and building a better life without them. They had shown me that I wasn't a priority in their lives, so I had made the choice to prioritize myself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away and let people face the consequences of their own choices. My family had chosen Madison's drama over my stability, temporary crisis over long-term reliability, and the squeaky wheel over the one that kept everything running smoothly. Now they were learning what life looked like without me to fix everything, and I was learning what life looked like when I put myself first. The difference was remarkable. I never did go back home, and I never regretted leaving. Some people might call it cold or unforgiving, but I call it self-respect. I had spent 18 years being taken for granted, and I refused to spend another day accepting less than I deserved. The girl who had quietly managed everyone else's problems was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that her own happiness mattered too, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their dysfunction and let them learn to function without you. As I looked around at my new life, built entirely by my own efforts and filled with people who valued me, I couldn't help but smile. This was what I deserved all along, and I was never going back to settling for less.